New reporting from the New York Times indicates that there's evidence for something we already knew. The Trump campaign already knew that the claims of election fraud were complete and utter nonsense, even as the campaign's lawyers, people like Sidney Powell and Giuliani, were doing press conferences repeating the lies of widespread voter fraud. Now, this is in regard to the ongoing defamation lawsuit that was filed by Dominion Voting Systems. Court papers, which were initially filed last week as a motion in the defamation lawsuit brought against the campaign and others by a former Dominion employee, Eric Coomer, contain evidence that officials in the Trump campaign were aware early on that many of the claims against the companies were baseless. So there was an internal memo that was ordered by the director of communication for the Trump campaign. And this memo looked into the claims of widespread voter fraud. What was contained in the memo? Well, the Dominion did not use voting technology from the software company Smartmatic in the 2020 election, that Dominion had no direct ties to Venezuela or Soros, and that there was no evidence that Dominion's leadership had connections to left-wing Antifa activists, as Sidney Powell and others had claimed. Now, despite the existence of this memo early on after the general election, there was that unhinged press conference featuring Powell and Rudy Giuliani. I want to give you a reminder of that right now.
The Dominion voting systems, the Smartmatic technology software, and the software that goes in other computerized voting systems here as well, not just Dominion, were created in Venezuela at the direction of Hugo Chavez to make sure he never lost an election after one constitutional referendum came out the way he did not want it to come out. We have one very strong witness who has explained how it all works. He was with Hugo Chavez while he was being briefed on how it worked. He was with Hugo Chavez when he saw it operate to make sure the election came out his way. That was the express purpose for creating this software.
I mean, just completely unhinged. Now, at that point, the memo already existed. According to the lawsuit, the documents also suggest that the campaign sat on its findings about Dominion, even as Sidney Powell and other lawyers attacked the company in the conservative media and ultimately filed 4 federal lawsuits accusing it of a vast conspiracy to rig the election against Donald Trump. So I've got more details, including the likelihood of the memo actually getting to people like Giuliani and Sidney Powell. But before we get to that, Cenk.
So the memo was already written when she said those things.
Yep.
So they had a top Trump campaign person tell them these are all nonsense, total, utterly not true. And by the way, guys, like the reason Anna said in the beginning, things we already knew, but this just confirms it, is because anyone with 2 brain cells knows that Hugo Chavez, who died 7 years ago, didn't rig the 2020 elections. If he died 7 years ago, how would he even know that Trump was going to be president? I mean, this is just so beyond absurd. But the minute the right wing says something, we wind up having a debate about it. And then, by the way, 40% of the country believes that. I mean, let's say that, okay, there's a 25% of Republicans that are not currently in an asylum. Call it 30% of the country, okay? 30% of the country sees that and goes, oh, obviously, Venezuela, Hugo Chavez, Dominion systems, etc. Now there's a memo that says, even they knew for sure, and they chose to lie to you. My guess is right-wingers will either never see that video because they don't watch regular news, they watch conservative news where they get fed nonstop lies, or they'll see it and since they're in a cult, they'll have cognitive dissonance and they'll go, no, it must not be true, it's fake news. Anything that doesn't make me feel good is fake news. So even though we basically have a smoking gun here, it won't work. 30% of the country has lost their minds. They won't believe it.
There's a concerted effort, and there's a reason why there's a concerted effort by conservatives to make education unattainable. There's a reason why during the 2016 Trump campaign, there was a concerted effort to make it as though being an educated American was somehow a bad thing. It made you an elitist, it made you a bad person. They prey on the ignorance of people in this country. And when I say ignorant, I don't mean it as an insult. You think most Americans get like a comprehensive lesson on Venezuela in school?
No, nobody
No.
does. Yeah.
Do you think that the majority of people who fell for these election fraud lies even know who Hugo Chavez is? So we might know that Hugo Chavez has been dead for a while, but the people who are more inclined to believe the lies coming from people like Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani don't know. And I'm not saying that it's their fault that they don't know. My point is that they are being preyed on by these very individuals who very likely knew the truth about what was going on. Now, why do I say very likely? Well, as the New York Times reports, it is unclear whether Trump knew or saw the memo. Giuliani said in a deposition that he had not seen the memo before he gave his presentation in Washington, and he questioned the motives of those who had prepared it. By the way, those who prepared it were Trump campaign officials.
And senior ones.
Senior campaign officials, okay, including the director of communications for the Trump campaign.
But by the way, now he's seen it because now they're all denying it. Oh, fake news. The guy who wrote it is deep state, even though he worked for Trump and helped him deny the Biden victories and helped him communicate his lies and all that stuff. But it doesn't matter. Everybody's deep state just to make it convenient. But now you know that your guys wrote the memo. Are you going to change your tune now? Nope. Trump's not going to change his tune. He's going to go back out tomorrow and say that the election was rigged and it was stolen and it was fraudulent and go, I lost, I didn't want to lose. He's such a little crybaby. I mean, on top of everything else, it turns out Republicans are the weakest people in the country.
Certainly the most sensitive.
They look at this pathetic, insecure, thin-skinned Donald Trump, obviously lying through his teeth, and they go, that's my leader. Because I'm so weak, he looks strong to me. Oh, that's pathetic.
And remember, there was a point after the 2020 election when the lawyers representing the Trump campaign decided to jump ship. They're like, this is not good, we're not doing this anymore, we're gone. At that point, Trump had already distanced himself from Sidney Powell because her statements were so incredibly unhinged. But once he had been abandoned by other campaign lawyers, he started considering bringing Sidney Powell back on. Like, the likelihood of Trump not knowing that the election fraud accusations were just lies is, in my opinion, unbelievable. But what is abundantly clear is that campaign officials, top-level campaign officials, did in fact know that it was complete and utter BS, and they sat on that memo and didn't stop Sidney Powell or Rudy Giuliani or any of these other Trump goons from going out there and questioning our democratic process. So the Trump campaign continued to allow its agents, the motion says, to advance debunked conspiracy theories and defame Mr. Coomer, apparently without providing them with their own research debunking those theories. And by the way, just to give you additional context into this lawsuit, the release of the documents was only the latest legal trouble for Giuliani and Powell, both of whom have been sued directly by Dominion for defamation. Dominion has also brought a defamation suit against Mike Lindell, the chief executive of MyPillow, for amplifying false election claims. Last month, a federal judge in Washington ruled that the case could continue moving forward toward trial.
Okay, so I want you to understand the chain of events, by the way. So Trump is relying on Sidney Powell, and she's saying, I'm going to release the Kraken, and Trump's saying, we got massive dumps of information, and they're going to be released, and et cetera. And then Dominion says, hey, listen, you schmucks, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, financial trouble, because you're obviously lying about us. Then there's an internal memo that says we're lying about them. So then Trump distances himself from Sidney Powell. Why? Because he's afraid of getting sued. And the minute money is involved, he's like, oh, no, Sidney Powell, who is she? I don't know who she is. Classic Trump, right? Then the real lawyers leave the building, and understand how unbelievable that is. If you're representing the president of the United States on an election issue, that is career-making case. So the ones that represented Bush and Gore still brag about it, or still celebrated all across town for, oh, that's the Bush lawyer, that's the Gore lawyer in 2000, right? These guys bail on Trump anyway. Why? Because he says to them, why don't you just go in and lie? Why don't you just go and tell them that I won? They're like, yeah, but we need evidence. He's like, shut up, I thought you were a lawyer. Go in there and goddamn it, lie for me. And lawyers go, even though this would make my entire career, I would get disbarred. I can't do it. So they leave. So then Trump's like, well, who's an idiot who's not a real lawyer? They're like, well, Sidney Powell. He's like, great, bring her back. And that's how things went down. So does Trump know that he was lying? Of course he knows he was lying. And so at least there's now a memo, but it doesn't matter. There's no amount of information or evidence that would ever get 30% of the country to change their minds because they're in a cult.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.